And of course, if you want a copy of the recording or anything like that, or a transcript, just let me know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go. My guest today on the Comfort Matters podcast is Gavin Hughes, who is the design director EMEA for Architects HLW, and we've just been talking off record about his Scottish roots. So you'll get to hear a nice Scottish brogue during this conversation. So that would be nice. So thank you so much for your time, Gavin.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me.
Okay. And we're looking to talk today about the idea of visual comfort. Now, I have a perception, and you might correct me on this, that compared to issues such as acoustic comfort and ergonomics, we don't really talk about visual comfort as quite so much. Do you think that's true?
Um, I do, yeah, no, I do actually, and I think one of the reasons for that is probably I think like acoustics and ergonomics are a bit more easy to measure. Whereas the kind of whole visual comfort thing, because it entails a bunch of different things, obviously lighting is, a key part of that. And with lighting, you obviously have guidance around lux levels and so on. But I think lighting and any sort of kind of visual input for humans is much more nuanced. There's a lot of kind of subjectivity to it as well. There's the kind of cliche of the big light in the house and everyone kind of fights over it. But some people genuinely seem to be, my wife being one of them, fine with like the big light blaring in the kitchen, whereas like I personally like really struggle with that. So I think lighting's definitely the kind of one of the key components within that.
Yeah, so I prefer daylight at work. I've got an office with a couple of windows. And I prefer to have the daylight than the artificial light, even if it looks a bit gloomy to people who come into the office sometimes. I think so.
Yep, absolutely. No, same. It's the same in our office, like in our studio in London as well. Someone wants to put the lights on, and some other people would much prefer even having just a bit of natural light within there because it does. I totally agree. Like, it just feels much more natural, and that would always
Yeah,
be the difference.
yeah. But you design for those things, though, don't you? Do you think clients brief you to maximize daylight, or do you think that that's not what they really worry about?
Yeah, no, no. I think most clients are pretty well educated nowadays around. We talk about obviously things like the BCO and any other sort of regulation and standards around prioritizing people in natural light, having them closest to that natural light within that kind of 6 meter band, and so on. So I think no, I think clients definitely aware of that. I guess where there's a bit less education maybe is around the artificial part of that. So, and I just looked this up earlier to just kind of clarify my mind what it was because there's that kind of challenge, I guess, of you have different lux levels for different tasks, obviously. So, looking at a computer or reading paperwork if people still do that. But then there's also different lux levels for if you're purely circulating. So if you're walking, just you want to get from A to B within any sort of space. And then likewise, when you go into maybe an internal staircase, often, we'll have staircases that connect different floors. None of those things have the same guidance around lux levels, but I think the kind of default seems to be that we just, flood it with artificial light, that you have that kind of most onerous situation where you've got the brightest light everywhere. Um, so yeah, I think there's definitely scope there to kind of challenge that, and maybe kind of test different levels depending on not just the task, but where you are and what you're kind of doing within the space.
Yeah, because I kind of feel like there's been a bit of a revival of interest in activity-based working now that maybe the return to office versus remote work debate has kind of settled down a bit. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, yeah, no, no, definitely. And I think, we talked a little bit earlier about, the pandemic and the kind of impact of that. I think during the pandemic and just after the pandemic, and this influences everything really, is everyone was trying to understand like what is the purpose of coming into the office now, and obviously everyone's trying to get people back into the office. And I think those initial conversations were very, very focused on collaboration. You know, it's like we all come in to collaborate. That's the main purpose. And I think now, you know, everyone's kind of accepting or realizing that that's not the case. You know, you look at different users from an organization or different roles within an organization. You know, one example would be like during the pandemic, you maybe get younger members of staff. Their home experience isn't going to be as positive necessarily. So they might be, especially in London, in a flat share, multiple people sharing that space, not a lot of communal spaces, you know, so they're quite limited in their experience of that. So they actually, you know, might want to come out of the office to do different things and actually to do focused and concentrated work with less distractions. So yeah, so long way of saying yes, I think there's definitely a kind of bigger drive for people, you know, to have, you know, that variety and that choice, and more importantly, the autonomy and how they use the space to suit.
Yeah. Yeah, because I kind of think the autonomy thing kind of gets overlooked sometimes as well. I mean, I know that there was that sort of cliche that grew up during the pandemic. I think that people come into the office to collaborate and they do their focused work at home. And actually, for some people, that's inverted, isn't it? They come into the office for a bit of peace and quiet, and you have to design spaces that accommodate those people as well as the ones who just come in because they want to be with their colleagues for a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and a lot of people come in to do really, you know, really kind of serious focus work, but they want to be there just because, you know, when they break out or when they're having lunch, like they still want to be part of the social aspect. And you know, we talk a lot in our studio about, you know, learning through osmosis, where you're just there, you know, and it might literally be you passing by a bank of desks to go and grab a coffee, you overhear something, and it sparks a conversation or it sparks a thought. So yeah, really important.
Yeah. And in terms of the lighting design of the space, that's comes to your back to your point of like if you've got people with different needs and doing different things in the office, you have to provide them with settings that reflect their need for visual comfort and lighting as well. So
Yeah, and it's also, I think, you know, we also talk a lot about choice when it comes to controlling those environments. And I know, you know, we've been talking about this for years in the industry around controlling lighting. Now, I think that becomes much more complex if you're in obviously if you're in an open space, you know, again, talking about the big light thing, it's like who controls that and who decides that and dictates that. I think it's much easier to do when you are in a smaller space, and that might be for something more focused where you've got that kind of localized level of control. Because it's not to say that, you know, everyone that wants to focus wants a kind of dark space, you know, it's like they might want to actually focus in a really brightly lit space because they're reviewing documents or whatever it might be. So there's always that, I guess, getting the balance and the right level of kind of control and choice. I mean, look, when you know, you fundamentally break it down, everyone, if they're in a kind of general workspace, you're either doing a task alone or you're doing it together. That's kind of how we define things. And then when you kind of cascade down from that alone together, there's a multitude of optionality that you really should have under that. Like I just said, you know, if you're alone, you might want a darker, duller space or local task lighting, but you might not. Same with when you're together as a group, and then that's when it becomes a bit more complicated, as I was just kind of alluding to, is how and who kind of dictates or controls that.
and I mean in terms of that's in service to the individual is what you're talking about, isn't it? So it's not just about people's preferences, but it can be about neurodiversity and physical disabilities, for example, if people are you know have problems with their sight, you have to accommodate all of those as well. What are the issues that people need to address when they're looking at that sort of thing?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I guess one of the challenges is there's less, I guess there's less kind of open or clear guidance around some of these things. So what I mean by that is, you know, there's a lot of standards and regulations right around the kind of, and I've talked about this before, this idea of like the average human, which doesn't exist, right? And everyone's kind of disproven that many years ago. But but it throws up this big challenge of like, so what do you design to and who do you design to then? Because there does need to be in any product, any like a phone or anything, any sort of product or physical space that people are interacting with, there does kind of need to be a baseline, I guess. We need to try and cater to that, maximum uh, catchment of people. But within that, obviously, it's really important then to think, right, what are all those other elements that we need to consider? So, like you just mentioned, when it comes to neurodiversity, some people again might be distracted by visual stimuli, so they actually need to be kind of or prefer to be isolated from that. The lighting's a big one, but also like sound. I know we kind of touched on acoustics kind of at the start of the conversation. Like I've personally never been diagnosed with anything, right? But I am pretty sure I've got is it misophonia, where
Yeah.
I read about this quite late in life, and in the description of it, I was like, oh my God, like this is this tick tick tick. But so I get incredibly distracted by almost enraged by certain sounds in certain situations. You kind of need to remove yourself from that. So anyway, as a long way of saying, it does go. I don't want it to sound like a kind of cop out, but it does go back to the idea of the variety, the choice, and the autonomy. And I really labour that all the time because even if you get the variety and the choice, if you've not created a kind of acceptable culture within an organisation that people can choose how and where they work that best suits them. Like they know themselves, as a human being, and they know what's going to work for them. And if they don't, that there's kind of a system in place that they can then, seek that help or that advice to try and understand that better and the types of spaces that might suit them. But then on the kind of, not quite flip side of that, related to that is choice paralysis, and I talk about this a lot. And you kind of link it to things like it's a bit of a cliche, right? But things like Netflix or any streaming platform with there are others available. You get that thing of you like sitting in the sofa at night and you're endlessly scrolling. You literally spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes scrolling and kind of dismissing things. Whereas, I'm old enough to remember when you had like four channels and you put it on and whatever was on, you had a one like four choice of what you wanted to watch. Um, so there's many things that you need to balance out. So that with the choice and the variety and the autonomy is making sure that it's not paralyzing people because you're offering too much or it's not clear, it's not intuitive how you control the light in a space or what is this space for. People might dismiss a space because they think, oh, I shouldn't really be going in there to do this sort of activity. Um, so yeah, that's a
Yeah. Do you know, I mean, on that, the choice paralysis thing, my daughter's 15 and she likes collecting records and she's got a little record player that I bought her. She doesn't want a better record player. She just wants this sort of single, boxed record player with inbuilt speakers, sits on a bedroom floor and her mates come around and they listen to records. And as well as all the
wonderful.
tactile, yeah, I think as well as all the tactile elements of that, it's just the just doing one thing because they could
Yeah,
easily listen to this stuff on Spotify
yeah,
along with 800 million other songs, but or whatever it is at the moment.
yeah,
And but they choose not to do it. They choose to listen to something for 25 minutes on vinyl. And
yeah.
I think that is taking deliberately. She shouldn't know this, I don't think, but she intuits it that that is what she's doing.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot in the media just now, isn't there, about that? There's different terms for it, but like two screening, where you've even got some streaming platforms that allegedly are kind of conscious around how they create content and what the content is that they create, that it's suitable for someone to be sitting on a phone, scrolling and then kind of half listening to the program and still be able to understand it enough. And that personally, I find that somewhat depressing because I don't think you get either benefit. There's no way that you can be truly appreciating the phone in your hand or the content that you're looking at on the screen and you're probably less likely to remember either of them, in the long run. Whereas there is, and don't ask me to quote anyone, but there is like science behind the tactility of things that humans touch and physically engage with holds much more resonance, and they remember it. It's like that kind of deep learning. Um, and I've got vinyl as well. That kind of process. It's almost like a kind of ritual, isn't it? Where you've got the kind of large format of the physical object. You're taking it out, you're placing it, and then, like you said, you've got that kind of limited time per side. But there's also the way that albums were curated, where you've got it's specifically designed to kind of have these peaks and troughs at the appropriate time to where you physically then have to turn it. There was an article years ago, slight tangent here, but it was around how iPod killed the album, the whole concept of the album. And it was because you could have, like Spotify now, where you've got that kind of infinite ability to just endlessly stream stuff, and then it will kind of sneak in things that it thinks you might like, which could be a great thing. You might discover something new. But yeah, there's just this kind of never endingness to it, whereas experiences, I think, should kind of have a finality to them, where it stops, and then there's a process time and a contemplation time, and then you kind of move on from that.
Well, I know where it doesn't work, and I think this is like an old farts, complaint. It's like the things like prog rock, concept albums. If you have one track in some sort of playlist off there, it will suddenly stop jarringly if you're used to the album, and it kind of segues into the next track. That doesn't happen on things like Spotify. So I do what I can not to have stuff like that on my playlist, because you just think it jars with me.
Yeah,
Anyway, so
absolutely.
there you go. But it's an interesting point to come back to the paralysis of choices, and the idea of visual comfort. Because do you think firms still tend to sort of say, well, as you were saying about standards, you have a level of lighting throughout the building, and they don't think about that enough, about how they might want to do something more intelligent than that with their space.
I think so. Sometimes, I think I guess one of the things that's the kind of bigger challenge for designers generally, like, and this is a personal opinion, is getting the balance of the effectiveness of a space with the emotive impact of a space. And I think there was a wee period where we maybe went and pushed too far and leant too far towards the effectiveness of it. I'm talking like pre-pandemic in particular, where it was very much about efficiencies and squeezing space down and sharing, and there was almost like a kind of consultant's agenda of like this is how everyone should kind of work. And I think there was a little bit of loss of touch with the importance of the emotive aspect of design. And I don't think one of these things needs to exist exclusively. Like they need to be balanced together. The example being, you could have the most efficient, effective space. Does everything it needs to do. It's been designed down to the last detail. IT works, all of that, but it's just bland, or it's vanilla, or it's not somewhere that's going to inspire people and really earn the commute. And people are waking up in the morning and jumping and clicking their heels to go into the office. And then on the flip side, you could have like, and we've all been in spaces like this, amazing pieces of architecture that are absolutely beautiful and awe-inspiring. But then if it's meant to perform a certain function and it doesn't quite hit all the beats that it should, very quickly grates and becomes, in my opinion, like a failure. So that's a kind of long way of saying like those two things really need to work together to make sure that yes, it's meeting all the regulations, it's very efficient and effective in how it's used, but we can also balance that with beauty. I don't know if there's a um, I don't know how you describe it. I mean, he writes books. He's a consultant for hire as well. Guy called Alan Moore, not to be confused with the comics Alan Moore,
Yeah,
who wrote Watchmen. But he wrote this wonderful little book, Do Design, and it talks about the importance of creating beauty in everything and why it matters. You know, and he likens that to you wouldn't go for a dreary meal. You know, you're gonna go for like a beautiful experience with wonderful food that looks great but also tastes wonderful. And that goes for everything in life, you know, like no one's going to kind of actively be excited about going to a dreary workspace. So yeah, it's our job to make sure that it's doing both of those things.
Okay. And in terms of the, making the workplace not just enticing for people, but also accessible. So I know this is one of the things that you're passionate about. You know, in terms of visual comfort, how do you go about that? You know, just with materials and with lighting and so on. So
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I don't think anyone would argue that obviously access to natural light is an absolute no-brainer, as is, you know, views outside, particularly if the views are inspiring or it's to nature. Like everyone knows that even just walking about in nature for a short period has amazing impact on human mind and body. But within that space, then, so within your actual office space, we've definitely seen, you know, a massive uptake in appreciating the importance of things like biophilia. You know, I know it's not a new thing; it's been there forever, and we've always been putting into projects. I think there's more and more general acceptance that this is like it's not a nice to have. This should actually be a fundamental part of it. But like you alluded to, materiality is key, and thinking about as a designer, you should be thinking about all the kind of touch points for that. So, you know, simple things like what was the surface of the desk that I'm working on, but also, you know, the door handle that I'm interacting with, the room that I'm sitting in, if I lean against the wall or if I touch it, or even when I'm circulating through a space. You know, humans are odd, you know, creations that like to touch things and poke things and try and that's how we understand things, isn't it? So we you need to think about all of that, like all of these touch points that people are going to physically interact with things, but also visually look at things. So, you know, we know I'm no neuroscientist, right? But you know, we understand that things like art, people look at art and have an emotional reaction to it, and they might not necessarily understand why that is. And it goes back to the music thing we were just talking about, which, you know, I think music is the ultimate like emotional, you know, change in people that no one can, you know, really touch on personally. Like a tone or a note can make you feel a certain way. And I do think like you know, the physical environment that you're not just interacting with, but are looking at can absolutely start triggering those feelings and those sensations. So if something's disjointed or you know aggressive or you know whatever it is, it could start to make you feel quite distressed in that environment. Whereas, of course, if you're surrounded by really considered materiality for the specific type of space it is, you know, so if it's a relaxing space, you've got lots of natural materials in there, tactile materials, warmth in that space, and that complements things like the lighting and the biophilia and so on and so forth. Like all of these things need to be kind of considered together to really you know, make the experience rich. It's like you know, humans are pattern recognizers. Again, we all know this, but you know, we might not necessarily understand the patterns that we're recognizing, but we definitely actively seek to kind of find you know, consistency of patterns within spaces. And then that also goes to the navigation part, doesn't it? So if you know, if you create a space that's confusing or people don't naturally understand, you know, how do I get out of this space or where do I go or what's over there? So yeah, so you need to kind of build that in. But again, going back to what I was talking about a minute ago, there's a danger you can do all those things and make it super efficient, super effective. You know, almost like an airport, which is a very transient liminal space, but it's got an incredible way, or it should have incredible wayfinding and signage system, so everyone kind of understands how to navigate it, no matter where you are. You know, in the world, there's this kind of universality to it. So yes, we don't want to create that, but you want to create the kind of intuitive ability within there.
yeah, I think wayfinding is an interesting one, isn't it? I think I think we've all seen those offices where they color code floors and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
I'm not sure who that is for. I mean, what is your view on color psychology? And by that I mean the bog standard magazine feature about red makes people feel like this and blue makes people feel like that. Do you think that's valid, or do you think there's something more interesting than that to talk about?
I think there's something more interesting to talk about. I think there's definitely a universality again between certain colours, and you see that in the fact that universally we kind of, or most places, use red as a signifier for really important information or danger, these sorts of things. So it's definitely there, but there's such a spectrum on all colours as well. So I don't think you could then say, all right, we can't have red in here because it's only going to ever activate, a kind of buzzy activity, or it's going to affect people in a certain way. There's such a spectrum that yeah, I wouldn't ever kind of really let that dictate a choice. It's more about if it's relevant and is considered to the space type, the volume of the space, how people are going to interact with it, what its function is, all of these things. I think, when you look at how people navigate cities or towns naturally, it's more around landmarks and recognizable landmarks. You know, you want to kind of create, I guess, a sense of place of where you are within that environment, and something that, I guess triggers a recognition or an understanding of like where you are and where you can go to within there. So I think our team generally, yes, we use color to help kind of, I guess, influence the space and also act as a, part of a wayfinding system. But I think it's more around your physical, call it like mass and volume of space or function of space. I think that's more impactful and more intuitive. People, like the kind of joke is like, when we were younger, you would navigate a city by its pubs, right? So you knew, oh, it's just round the corner past McCool's or whatever pub it might be. And that, I think that still works, and it would be in an office environment, maybe it's like, all right, actually we're just past, the big kitchen point, or we're next to the staircase, or we're behind this, feature space, whatever it might be. So yeah, I don't think there's like any one answer to any of it.
And do you have examples from your own work that you think people should maybe look at that sort of explore all of these ideas?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, two that probably spring to mind immediately that are kind of current. We did a project for Wise in London, so they
Yeah.
came out the famous Tea building, and they've still in Shoreditch in a very kind of recognizable blue building. So that in itself from the outside is a kind of beacon within the space. But the design and the fit out of the interior, that actually does use a lot of color, and this is again what's relevant and what's suitable for a client or what they want to achieve within the space. So that project was very much collaboration with the client. They wanted that color, they wanted that vibrancy within the space. So it's like how do we help that, let users know again where they are within the space, but also the activity. So the example within Wise would be we've put in this super bright green staircase that connects all the floors. Now that's connected to the Wise brand. That's their kind of hero color. This really vibrant green. So that's the kind of physical anchor that's connecting everything. But then on each of those floors, did deploy a kind of color system within those areas, and that just really does help people understand where they are. But it's also within that central space, which is around the staircase, which primarily is about people coming together. So within there, you've got a mix from open lounge set and very very informal. You've obviously got the kind of main kitchen space on each floor, tea point on the floor. So you get more kind of kitchen, table type scenario. And then you've also got, semi-enclosed booths that are very informal again. So I would say like the vibrancy within there reflects the fact that it is about people coming together generally in a kind of quite a buzzy way. And then the acknowledgement is that, if people want focus and quiet work, which is plenty of space to do that in, That is actually much more about general workspace, which is then supported with all the things you would expect, phone booths, phone rooms, acoustically, sealed rooms, etc. And those environments are, I would say, lean much more to the kind of calmer, quieter finishes. But then again, you've still got some rooms within there, like private rooms that are, very, very vibrant and kind of tie back into that the kind of Wix culture within that space. And then slight tangent, but within there as well, I don't know if you know this project, but they've taken like that notion of wellness and again neurodiversity pretty much to the next level. So they've got a sauna in there, which links back to the Estonian roots, which is fantastic. And then next to that, they've got the kind of wellness suite where you've got massage chairs, access to this nice little terrace in London, which is actually kind of secluded. It's surrounded by buildings, so it creates this really nice little kind of oasis in the heart of like, Buzzing, Shoreditch. And then quickly, the other one at a totally different scale was Wix. So Wix, tech company based in Tel Aviv. We worked with them for a number of years. I think we first met them in like 2018, and then they were creating this, huge campus, coming from what was effectively a distributed campus spread across the kind of port within Tel Aviv, and they've grown exponentially. So from a startup, however many years ago, we've basically created a 3,000 person, campus. It's over 800,000 square foot. And within there, it was incredibly complex because the base build was designed by Moshe Zur architects, and it was originally meant to be a multi-tenanted building. It was never thought that there would be anyone that would be, this scale to take this entire building. So it was actually designed with a shopping mall at the lower level,
Right.
and then above that, you've got a series of stacked buildings that sit on top of each other and run at different angles. So hard to explain without showing a diagram, but very complex for a single tenant. So there was a huge exercise of understanding how do people just get between these buildings? Because they're only connected on certain levels. It's not like these are all connected buildings. So the vertical transportation of getting people down, getting across then the campus at certain levels, the activities that happen around those connection points. They've got numerous restaurants, beauty salon, shop, like part of a mall, like everything. So taking the kind of I guess amenities and the choice and the variety really to the next level. And then within there, we did have to implement a kind of color strategy. So you've got as I said, the stacked blocks that are only connected on certain floors. So each of those blocks had to have its own unique palette. But then there's got to be a consistency across the whole campus. You can't design all of that across a campus. It's not effective or efficient. So we had to create that palette that works with a commonality, but then also represents an individual personality within each of those buildings, and also for it not to feel really basic, so it can't just be like, right, here's a pink wall, that's the pink building. So there was lots of kind of subtleties in like the wayfinding and signage, the lettering, but then also commissioned artworks. So those guys, Wix as a client, super creative. They've got their own internal creative teams, and we worked with those guys, and they really developed these bespoke art pieces in each of the buildings in different spaces. So that also had that recognition, so that landmark part of it, as well as the color strategy as well. And then the kind of use of the physical space in each of those blocks had to have a consistency. So by that I
Right.
mean, you come out the lifts, you land in the main social point. That's the same throughout the whole campus, and it just made that much more intuitive for anyone, whether it's day one or day 100 on campus.
Okay, brilliant. I think actually we did a case study on Wise in the last issue of Works magazine.
Okay.
I need to double check that, but I think it's issue 15 of Works. We did it in there, but I don't think we've looked at the Wix one because it always helps to see these things as well, doesn't it? If people can do that, and I'm guessing they're both featured on your website, on the HLW website.
Yeah, 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 they are to a degree. I mean, the like Wix, for example, as I said, it's such a huge project and we worked on it for years. It's a very difficult one to kind of, capture in a case study on a website that's, 5 images and a little paragraph of text. But yeah, more I love talking about it and showing there's lots of imagery that no one's really seen that's not really been published out there yet. So yeah, love talking about it. I'm happy to talk about it if anyone wants to know
Yeah,
any
well,
more.
okay, well, we'll try and follow up on that, but that's great. Thank you so much. Well, I think we're out of time. Is there anything you'd like to add before we finish?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the message for me is always I'm like a broken record. Um, the choice of variety and autonomy, that is for me is the kind of basis of everything. And it's understanding nuance. And I guess this kind of reflects where we are as a society just now, where there's almost the death of nuance. Everything's very black and white, and there's so much combativeness in media and in the news and so on. I think we all need to just maybe chill out a little bit and understand nuances and take the time to understand them. And that only comes from talking to each other and trying to understand things.
That's a great message to finish on, and I couldn't agree more. Gavin, thank you so much.
Great. No worries. Thanks a lot.